In the final year of World War II, Japan was running out of time. The empire that once expanded outward across Asia was now collapsing inward upon itself. Cities burned faster than they could be rebuilt. Factories lay in ruins. Harbors were choked with wreckage. And above it all, the sky belonged to the enemy. Every night, the distant hum of American bombers grew louder. The seas were no longer safe. Submarines hunted relentlessly. Convoys vanished without warning. What had once traveled freely across the Pacific now sank silently beneath it. Japan was being cut off from the world. And yet, deep inside the home islands, something precious was still moving. Not soldiers, not civilians. Gold. Looted from across occupied Asia. Stripped from banks, temples, royal vaults, and private reserves. Melted down, recast, weighed, numbered, crated, and loaded, piece by piece, onto a train that was never meant to be seen. A train that would never reach Tokyo. This is not a story of battlefield heroics or famous generals. It is a story of shadows, silence, and disappearance. A story buried beneath rubble, sealed by defeat, and erased by time. This is the mystery of Japan's lost gold train. Long before the train began its final journey, the gold had already traveled far. Japan's war across Asia was not only a campaign of conquest, it was a campaign of extraction. From the moment Japanese forces occupied foreign territory, economic control followed military control. Banks were seized. Colonial treasuries were inventoried. Private wealth was confiscated under emergency decrees. Temples were searched. Safe deposit boxes were forced open. Gold was not symbolic, it was survival. In China, entire provincial reserves disappeared as Japanese administrators replaced local governments. In Nanking, Shanghai, and Beijing, bank vaults were emptied under military supervision. Official receipts were issued, but repayment never came. In Southeast Asia, Dutch and British colonial gold reserves fell into Japanese hands as European power collapsed. In Malaya, Burma, and the Dutch East Indies, gold bullion that once backed colonial currencies was quietly removed from circulation. In the Philippines, the fall of Manila placed American and Commonwealth gold at risk. Emergency evacuations saved some. Much was left behind. Everywhere Japan advanced, gold followed, not as plunder for individuals, but as assets for the empire. By 1943, Japan possessed enormous quantities of precious metals, gold, silver, platinum, taken from across Asia. Some was used immediately to finance the war. Some was traded through neutral intermediaries. But a significant portion was held in reserve, stored, hidden, waiting. At first, Japan believed the home islands were secure. Tokyo's vaults were considered untouchable. Underground storage facilities were expanded. Records were classified. The gold would be protected until victory. But by 1944, that illusion was gone. American submarines strangled Japan's shipping lanes. Allied bombers reached farther inland with every month. Industrial centers were reduced to ash. Even Tokyo was no longer safe. And gold, once a symbol of security, became a liability. A stationary target. Something that could be destroyed in a single night. Japan's leaders faced a desperate question. How do you protect wealth when nowhere is safe? The answer lay not in the sky or the sea, but on steel rails. Japan's railway system was one of the most sophisticated in Asia. Built for efficiency, precision, and control, it connected ports, factories, military bases, and cities with clockwork reliability. During wartime, it became a weapon. Troop movements, ammunition transfers, industrial evacuations, all depended on rail. And within this vast network existed a smaller, darker system, one that did not appear on public schedules. Special trains. These trains carried cargo too sensitive for records, too valuable for disclosure. Their routes were classified, their schedules changed constantly. Their guards answered not to railway authorities, but directly to military intelligence. Rail workers later spoke of them in fragments. Engines arriving without notice. Platforms suddenly cleared. Military police replacing civilian guards. Paperwork sealed in envelopes marked only with code numbers. No destination listed, no cargo declared. These trains moved at night. Lights dimmed, steam muffled, whistles silenced whenever possible. They stopped only when ordered. They departed without explanation. By late 1944, such trains were being used for one purpose above all others: relocation. As American B-29 bombers targeted rail hubs and industrial zones, Japan scrambled to move critical assets inland. Factories were dismantled and transported to mountain regions. Machinery vanished from cities overnight, and gold, immobile, heavy, irreplaceable, had to be moved. Coastal storage depots were death traps. Ports were under constant surveillance. Any ship large enough to carry gold was a target. Rail offered concealment. Rail offered flexibility. Rail offered deniability. Small shipments could be merged. Routes could change. Records could disappear. Somewhere in this chaos, orders were issued for a major transfer. Multiple sources suggest that gold held in Western Japan, much of it originally taken from China and Southeast Asia, was to be moved toward the Tokyo region, but not directly. First, it would be shifted inland, away from the coast, away from bombing corridors, away from prying eyes. The train assembled for this task was different. Witnesses later described unusually reinforced cars, axles designed for extreme weight, military guards far heavier than normal. Even railway engineers noted the strain placed on the tracks. This was not a routine transfer. This was everything Japan could not afford to lose. And once loaded, the train departed. No announcement, no record. Only steel wheels cutting into darkness. No surviving Japanese document identifies the train by name. There is no official manifest, no confirmed departure log, no recorded arrival. And yet evidence of its existence survives in fragments, scattered across testimonies, railway anomalies, and post-war inconsistencies. In the winter of 1944, railway maintenance crews in western and central Japan reported unusual stress damage along specific mountain routes. Rails bent in places where no heavy freight traffic was scheduled. Wooden sleepers cracked prematurely. Switch mechanisms required emergency reinforcement. At the time, these reports were dismissed as wartime wear. Only later would some engineers quietly suggest another explanation: weight, far more weight than ordinary cargo. Former station staff, interviewed decades after the war, recalled a train that arrived without notice, late at night. Platforms were cleared by military police. Station clocks were covered. Even senior railway supervisors were ordered to remain inside offices. One man remembered being told simply, "Do not look, do not ask." The train's cars were sealed. Guards stood at intervals with rifles slung, but hands never far from the trigger. No insignia marked the engine. No destination was spoken aloud. What stood out most, witnesses said, was how slowly it moved. Not because of mechanical failure, but because it was burdened. Steel wheels groaned against rails. Brakes were tested repeatedly. Engineers kept speeds low, especially on curves and inclines. This was not a train rushing to meet a deadline. It was a train trying not to be noticed. Intelligence analysts would later conclude that Japan's leadership feared not only Allied attack, but internal collapse. As defeat loomed, safeguarding national assets became as important as battlefield defense. Gold represented leverage. Gold meant post-war survival. Gold meant bargaining power. If Japan lost the war, whoever controlled the gold would shape the future. And so the train moved, slowly, quietly, through a country already coming apart. By early 1945, the American bombing campaign against Japan had entered its most destructive phase. The B-29 superfortress, operating from newly captured Pacific islands, now had the range to strike the home islands repeatedly. Night after night, wave after wave, bombers crossed the Japanese coast. Their primary targets were factories and cities, but railways were the arteries that fed them. Marshalling yards were hit relentlessly. Junctions were cratered. Bridges collapsed into rivers and valleys. Tunnels were sealed by cave-ins and explosions. The objective was simple: paralyze movement. Without rails, Japan could not fight. For trains carrying ordinary cargo, this meant delays and detours. For one train carrying something irreplaceable, it meant danger. Somewhere along its route, whether in the mountains of Honshu or along a remote inland corridor, the gold train entered a zone of intense bombardment. Air raid warnings wailed across the countryside. Searchlights cut through cloud cover. Anti-aircraft guns fired blindly into darkness. Bombs fell not in neat lines, but in chaos. Rail lines vanished beneath fireballs. What happened next has never been officially recorded, but several possibilities emerge from the pattern of destruction. One scenario suggests a bridge ahead of the train was destroyed moments before crossing. Engineers may have attempted an emergency stop, derailing cars into a ravine or river below. In such terrain, recovery would have been nearly impossible amid continued bombing. Another theory points to tunnels. Japan's interior is riddled with rail tunnels carved through mountains. A direct hit or near miss could collapse an entrance, trapping a train inside. Buried alive, sealed behind tons of rock and earth. There is also the possibility of deliberate action. Faced with imminent destruction or capture, commanders may have ordered the train diverted into sidings, spur lines, or unfinished tunnels intended to conceal its cargo permanently. Gold could be buried, tracks could be dismantled, records could be erased. In wartime Japan, obedience was absolute. Silence was survival. What is certain is this. After a particular night of bombing, no one agrees exactly which, the train vanished from all known rail traffic. No further sightings were reported. No recovery crews were dispatched. No emergency notices circulated. In a country accustomed to meticulous record-keeping, the absence of documentation is itself evidence. The rails went silent. August 1945. Japan surrendered. Cities lay in ruins. Millions were displaced. The empire dissolved almost overnight. Allied occupation forces arrived with a mandate not only to disarm Japan, but to account for its resources. Gold was a priority. American officials demanded full disclosure of Japan's financial reserves. Vaults were opened. Inventories were compared. Pre-war figures were cross-referenced with wartime records. Something did not add up. Large quantities of precious metals were unaccounted for. Not destroyed in bombings, not seized by Allied forces, simply missing. Japanese officials offered explanations. Records had burned. Transportation documents were lost. Accounting errors occurred during emergency evacuations. But privately, occupation authorities noted discrepancies too large to ignore. The weight was wrong. Some gold was later recovered from hidden caches and underground vaults. But even after these discoveries, gaps remained. Gold that should have existed, based on known seizures across Asia, was never found. When questioned, railway officials denied knowledge. Military police claimed ignorance. Intelligence files were sealed or destroyed. The war had ended, but the trail had already gone cold. By the time Japan rebuilt its cities and rewrote its history, the gold train had passed into rumor. And rumor, when repeated long enough, becomes legend. In the years immediately following Japan's surrender, survival came first. Cities were rebuilt from ash. Rail lines were repaired. Factories returned to life. And millions of people tried to forget what the war had taken from them. But in quiet places, the past refused to stay buried. Railway workers who had kept silent during the war began to speak, carefully, indirectly, often years apart. Their stories never matched perfectly, but the outlines were the same. A train that ran only once. A cargo that bent steel. Orders that came from nowhere and could not be questioned. In rural prefectures, farmers spoke of tunnels that were sealed abruptly in 1945 and never reopened. Some were officially marked as unstable. Others were simply fenced off and forgotten. In mountain villages, elders recalled nights when bombing shook the earth, followed by the sound of trains that never emerged. Divers exploring reservoirs created by wartime dam projects reported metallic shapes beneath layers of silt. Rail enthusiasts photographed submerged track segments that vanished into deep water. Nothing was ever officially confirmed, but nothing was fully denied either. Requests to excavate collapsed tunnels were routinely rejected on safety grounds. Archival access to wartime railway intelligence files remained restricted for decades. When researchers pressed too hard, they encountered silence or deflection. Japan, focused on economic recovery, had little interest in reopening wounds, and Allied occupation authorities, having already departed, left behind unanswered questions. The gold train slipped further into the shadows. By the 1970s and 1980s, Japan's lost gold had become a magnet. Not for historians, for treasure hunters. Independent researchers scoured declassified bombing maps, Amateur historians interviewed aging railway staff. Metal detector enthusiasts searched abandoned sidings and overgrown spurs. Most found nothing. A few found traces, anomalous rail alignments that ended abruptly, sections of track that did not appear on civilian maps, concrete-sealed tunnel mouths hidden behind vegetation. Occasionally, a story would surface of a discovery made too quietly. A sealed chamber opened and quickly closed again, a local authority intervening without explanation. An excavation halted overnight. These stories were impossible to verify, but they followed a pattern. The more credible the lead, the faster it disappeared. Some believe the Japanese government quietly recovered the gold long ago, folding it into post-war reserves. Others suspected Allied intelligence seized it and buried the truth alongside Cold War secrets. Then there were those who believed no one ever found it, that the train still waits, rusting, buried, untouched. If so, it would not be gleaming treasure, it would be a tomb. Over time, four dominant theories emerged. Each attempts to explain the same silence: the mountain burial. This theory holds that the train derailed or was deliberately hidden in a mountainous region after bombing made further travel impossible. Landslides, earthquakes, and vegetation then erased visible traces. Japan's terrain makes this plausible. Entire villages have vanished beneath slides. A buried train could remain undiscovered indefinitely. The flooded valley. As dams were built and valleys flooded during wartime industrial expansion, rail lines disappeared beneath reservoirs. A train lost in such an area would now lie far below water, concealed by mud and time. Divers have reported shapes consistent with rail cars, but depth and safety concerns prevent confirmation. The secret transfer. According to this theory, the train's disappearance was staged. The gold was transferred to hidden vaults or dispersed among multiple locations, leaving the train empty or destroyed to mislead investigators. This would explain the lack of wreckage and the persistent secrecy, the paper vanishing. The final theory denies the train entirely. It argues that the gold was siphoned off through accounting manipulation, black markets, and wartime corruption. The train exists only as a convenient myth to explain missing assets. But this theory struggles with eyewitness testimony. Too many people remember the wait, too many recall the night it passed, and too many records stop abruptly where answers should begin. It is tempting to see this story as a hunt for treasure, but gold is not the heart of this mystery. Justice is. The wealth carried on that train did not originate in Japan. It was taken from nations already devastated by war and occupation. Families lost livelihoods. Countries lost reserves meant to rebuild. None of it was ever returned. If the train exists, it is not a prize, it is evidence. Evidence of how war erases ownership, how defeat buries responsibility, how history favors the powerful and forgets the silent. Every bar of gold represents a vanished ledger entry, a closed vault, a broken promise. The train is a symbol of what happens when empires fall and accounts are never settled. Today, Japan's railways run with precision once more. High-speed trains cross the country in hours. Tunnels pierce mountains that once resisted steel and fire. The past seems distant, almost unreal. But beneath modern tracks, older rails still lie. Abandoned lines curve into forests. Sealed tunnels vanish into rock. Flooded valleys hide what once moved across steel. Somewhere along those forgotten paths, history may still be waiting. A train that carried the weight of an empire. A journey cut short by fire from the sky. A mystery preserved by silence. Because until that train is found, until the gold is accounted for, the story is not finished. The rails do not end, they only disappear.